How's it going? My name is Andy, and this is going to be my introduction video to my YouTube channel. I'm going to tell you guys the reasons why I moved from Sacramento, California to Northern Idaho. We'll start out by saying that I was born in Spokane, Washington, but when I was really young, I grew up down in California. My parents raised me down in San Jose, California. So I've lived in California until I was about 20, and then I did a prison term until I was about 26, 27. And then I did what was called an interstate transfer to Northern Idaho. And since then, I've been off and on living in this area for the last 20 years, roughly. But I made the final move with my fiance and kid. We moved from Sacramento a little over 4 years ago up here to Northern Idaho. And I want to tell you guys the reasons why. The community is about 96% white. Not that that's a big deal to me, not that I care, but it's a clear difference in attitude towards neighborliness, if that's a word, towards the police, towards fire, towards drugs, towards crime, towards littering, towards wilderness. It is a night and day difference, is what I've seen so far, between the type of people you would meet, let's say, in Midtown Sacramento versus the average redneck type you meet out here in Northern Idaho. It is a night and day difference. It is not what I expected, for one. If I was to start over and act like I didn't know these people before, that is not what you would expect. Okay, most of the news wants to portray this area like it's completely full of Aryan nations and skinheads and all these racist people. It couldn't be farther from the truth. Okay, if anything, it's completely opposite. There's a lot of good people out here, and a lot of people want more diversity out here, if anything. And then there's a lot of people that don't really mind that people think that this place is so hateful, because I'm one of those. I don't mind if people think that. In fact, I kind of like it, and I'll tell you the truth. This place is getting crowded. There's a lot of people moving here, right? Same as Montana. So the more and more that you guys outside of this area think that it's full of nothing but racist people, the better off you are. But I want to tell you why a lot of like-minded people have moved here from California, okay? For a lot of us, the writing's on the wall, not just with the obvious, with the cost of living and with taxes and whatnot in California, but there's this hidden, not even hidden, there's an obvious agenda or propaganda to hate on white people. Now, I don't really care how you take that, right? It's pretty obvious that there's a agenda that white people come last in this country right now, especially white males, for whatever reason. It doesn't seem very hard to figure that out. And so living down in Sacramento, where whites are the minority, you could simply be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And because you're white, they will rob you. Okay? And I don't care if you tell me, oh, that's racist. I really don't care. I've been called every name in the book. I really don't care at this point. Right? It's not even about that. It's about living in a high trust society. You see, when you live in places like Sacramento, you better lock your doors to your car. You better not leave anything valuable sitting out. You better not hope you don't live in a bad neighborhood, right? You better lock your doors when you leave for work. Well, what if I told you I don't have to do any of that out here? That nobody does. People trust people out here. I mean, I got cameras in my shop here, right? Because I'm from California, essentially. I grew up down there. I lock my doors. I don't. Right, I'm still trying to get used to the idea of leaving my car door unlocked in the morning before I go out there. Everybody does this. My neighbor has his Harleys sitting out in his garage every day with the garage door wide open. He's not watching them, Like it's a totally different type of society. My 2 doors down, he lets his kids leave his bikes out in the front yard. You can't do that in California, okay? And it's sad, the amount of ghetto-ness, okay? And if you guys are wondering, in Sacramento, I lived off of Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, over in that area, off 42nd. So, was not a nice neighborhood. I don't care what you say, all right? And, but me growing up on the streets like that, in San Jose, I grew up kind of in the ghetto too, right? Growing up like that, I'm wise to times and places where you don't want to be at. Namely bars. That's why I don't drink anymore. But that goes for any bar, by the way. But like I said, the reason I moved is because the community is a night and day difference out here. All right. I have yet to see, in the 4 years since I moved back here, I've seen 2 homeless people. It's illegal to panhandle. All right. You can't ask people for spare change. It's illegal. Right. You get a citation for that. You go to jail. Okay. You can't hitchhike on the side of the road. You go to jail for that. So I have not seen homeless people. And even the areas of town in Coeur d'Alene where people are like, this is the ghetto part. I have no idea what they're talking about. It is such a nice neighborhood. You don't see trash all over the streets. You know, you just, people go to church every Sunday. The churches are packed on Sundays. All right. You don't see that necessarily in Sacramento, unless I was just in the wrong neighborhood, like you said. But I've lived in a few neighborhoods in Sacramento, worked in a few areas of Sacramento. I even lived in Midtown, and it was not the same type of environment. And it's amazing to think how politically different it was and how different the environment was completely. The American and the Sacramento River meet up in Sacramento into the Sacramento River. All right, they basically, there's like a delta right there. Okay, so the American River is a slower moving river, whereas the Sacramento River is moving a lot faster. It's a lot more volume of water. So the American River, you can see these scars on my arm right there, those little circles, right? Okay, I had gotten some tattoo work, and it had been a month since I got some work done. So I figured it was completely healed. We're good to go swimming, right? So I jumped in the American River, right? I got a nasty MRSA infection. And the reason being is because the American River had 7 times the legal limit of E. coli in it. It was from the homeless people shitting in the river, okay? I had just thought it was okay, you know, like that year in particular was really bad, I guess. So yeah, it's a river, you think it's fine, but no, it's full of human feces and needles and trash. I mean, the amount of volume of trash that you see floating down these rivers, you know. I went back last summer to move my in-laws. We moved my lady's parents in with us into a house. So now I have a permanent babysitter, right? I work a lot, so I'm not around them, so I can deal with them. And they have their own basement living space, so we're separate living areas basically. But, you know, we went back to that area of California, that Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and it was a culture shock, a huge shock. I had completely forgotten where I was living at and just the environment. And it was like, I just so grateful when I came back that I'm going to raise my family up here in Northern Idaho rather than Sacramento, California. I mean, I would have tried to do my best to teach them morals, but you got to understand how environment, the people around you, the teachers, the type of curriculum they teach, right? It makes a big difference. And of course, your parents are involved in teaching your kid their morals too as well. But it's a lot harder when you have to work more to pay higher bills because your cost of living is higher, so your kid is raised by the state, essentially. That's essentially what happens, okay? And I mean, it kind of goes the same for everywhere you live, but at least here, right now I have the in-laws, they're retired, they're watching the kid. I have that going for me. But the difference in environment that my kid gets to grow up in from California versus Idaho, just, like I said, a whole different mentality of people. And, you know, they just happens to be 96% white people. It just happens to be that, okay? But you go over to Spokane, which is an hour over into Washington, and your crime rate is 5 times higher. I looked up the stats. If you guys are wondering, this is a fact. Property crime is 5 times higher. Violent crime is 4 times higher over in Spokane than it is over in Northern Idaho. And you're talking about a half an hour distance of driving over state line. People come and go through Spokane to Idaho all the time. They wanted to build a bus recently, like a public transportation bus, and they got voted down because Idaho's not stupid. We're like, no, you're not going to bus your homeless people over here. No, you're not doing that, right? So the other flip side to this too is 80% of the felonies in our county jail are people that are from Spokane. They came over from Spokane and decided they wanted to be a fucking idiot and cause problems. Now they're sitting in the jail. So our community is a lot different. It's a very, very high trust society, and I would not give that up for the world. I would not, there's no way you could pay me enough to go live down in a place like Sacramento ever again. First off, it's too hot. The weather sucks. I'll take the snow any day over all the other things that comes with places like Sacramento. You know, and I did not want my daughter to be bullied simply for the color of her skin. That's not an environment I want my kid being raised in. So if you guys agree, or you at least feel the same way I do, if you can do anything, if you have the power, get out of that environment if you're in that environment. It's time to separate ourselves. It's not that I hate anybody, it's that they hate you. And once you understand it and once you see it, the media is pushing this to the fullest. Once you see the propaganda, how bad they hate white people right now. And when you see it, you understand, I might as well go join up with my people. Which is a normal thing to do, by the way, is to have social preference. I have always had a social preference towards my people. You know, and I was in high school in the 90s, and the difference, too, in mentality from people from the 90s until now, they are pushing this racism thing to its fullest. It's on life support, and they're throwing nitrous oxide, into the tank, trying to keep this motor going. That's not going anymore. It's dead. The head gasket's blown, dude. Like, it's over. Nobody thinks like that. The people do, though. Useful idiots. You know, and this is the result that we're having from it, is that a lot of stupid people got in charge and are pushing stupid agendas. And I'm sorry, but maybe it's time to physically relocate. Maybe it's time to be around your people more and be better, more involved in your community, because that's exactly what I did. I would not want to be involved in the community down there in Sacramento. First off, I wouldn't have any time. Second off, it just not my thing. So if I could just describe the peace and serenity I have up here, there's just absolutely no drama in my life. And a lot of that, too, has to do with me not bringing it into my life, of course. I understand that. But, you know, I don't get harassed by police. Not that I was in Sacramento either. But, you know, like most people drive a decent car out here. There seems to be a good, decent amount of money in this area. You know, I like I said, I do not see poverty and crime out there. I don't. You know, I follow the news, and the stuff that makes the news is like a drug bust in the parking lot of Super One Foods. Okay? That's literally on the Facebook news page. That's the kind of stuff that happens. Although the other day, some crazy stuff happened. Some guy coming from Spokane, decided he wanted to go on some rampage. He carjacked somebody, then tried to carjack a second person when he got in the state line, shot and killed a guy, left, got in a high-speed chase, hit a motorcyclist, wrecked, got out. The cops ended him right there in Washington. The Washington cops got him. But he started his parade in Spokane and came over to Idaho, and somebody unfortunately lost their life. That is the biggest thing to happen out here that I can remember. That we don't really have cases like that. I mean, of course you have, you know, people unaliving others. That happens everywhere. Usually crimes of passion. But the rate at which these things happen, our violent crime, like I said, is like 1/4 of the national average. The property crime is 1/5. We're also a 2A open carry, closed carry state. It's a 2A absolutist state here. I have never been harassed for my guns ever. And when you get pulled over, they don't even ask. They don't care. It's a different mentality. They you know, if I was to pull out a gun, he'd probably shoot me anyways. Right? Like, it's the will of people. Okay? It's the ill will of people towards others. It's a sick individual that commits the crime. It could have been with a sword. It could have been with a hand grenade. It doesn't matter. Right? If you're that person, you're going to be that person anyways, whether you have a gun or not. And if anything, if everybody is armed, you have way less of it, because you don't know who the hell's going to pull out a gun and shoot you. In fact, I'll bring up another story why this area is so much better than California. So it was like a year ago in the parking lot of a Target. This guy was going in. He was from Spokane. Again, he was a tweaker, tweaking around, breaking into people's cars in the parking lot in broad daylight in Target. So a guy saw him doing it, smashing windows, breaking in, stealing purses, whatever, right? So this guy sees him do it, and so he pulls out his gun and like citizens arrest him. Well, the guy gets into a car and starts it because people even leave their keys in the car out here too. Again, this is a very high trust society. Guy takes off the car and the guy gets up on the hood as they drive off, and so he decides to shoot him 6 times, and that ends it right there. They wreck, he flies off the hood, he has to go to the hospital, he gets all beat up, but he lived. Not too bad. It wasn't in stable condition. He wasn't in anything serious. The suspect died at the scene. No charges were filed against the guy with the pistol. Okay, clearly it was a self-defense case. Stand your ground. Okay, this is the kind of state we have. In California, you know he would have been charged with something. You absolutely know he would have been charged with aggravated assault or something ridiculous like that. I mean, like, there is no such thing as self-defense in California, right? I look at places like South Africa, and regardless if you say it's a conspiracy theory or not, but there's a definite genocide going on in South Africa, and it is against white people. I've seen enough videos and I've heard enough stories from real people from South Africa to know what's going on, okay? You can't convince me otherwise, all right? And I see that in the future for America if we don't chill this shit. If we don't all just either move with your people, physically separate, or, I mean, that's literally the only suggestion I have is to move. Just get out. Because the amount of propaganda that we see now, it's only going to get worse and worse. And once we become the minority, which is like 2045, if we don't continue to not have kids, but by 2045, whites are going to be the minority in America and pretty much the world, entirely the world. We are the minority now. We're like 6% of the world's population, right? Are you guys seeing this? We're being outpaced by the rest of the world as far as breeding goes, right? Literally, like, white people just aren't having children, and a lot of it has to do with developed countries and the cost of living and devaluation of their currencies and whatnot. But yeah, we're headed for a train wreck. Okay, so my suggestion would be to form community with like-minded individuals. And so if you're like-minded individuals, you need to move to where there's high-trust societies. If you're a high-trust individual and you know who you are, you need to move to a high-trust society. It will change your life. So anyways, my name's Andy, and that's the reasons I moved out of California.